Welcome to JMR Talks. Today we will discuss about Sri Lankan economic crisis. The moment we think of Sri Lanka, what is that comes to our mind? A country with a population of 2 crores 20 lakhs, beautiful beaches, tea gardens, etc. But what is Sri Lanka today? With a looming what we call economic crisis, long queues, skyrocketing what we call prices, unsustainable public debt. In fact, this crisis was never seen before during the last 73 years or so. Though in 1977 they did face a crisis as such. But how did this Sri Lanka landed in such an economic crisis? The first and foremost reason is what called the burden of debt. The government left and right what called borrowed loans from the foreign development institutions, countries and all that, and probably the said borrowed funds were not channelized into what are called productive areas whereby they could have generated revenue and paid back them. And one hasty decision when Mahendra Rajapaksa was the prime minister was taken is the part about organic farming. So with a view to encourage organic farming, they banned what are called import of fertilizers. So as a result, what happened that farmers who grow vegetables also, they were not able to what call get required what call chemical fertilizers as such. As a result, the productivity has gone down. Say 1 acre of land, giving a yield of 100 bags was giving only about 20 to what call 30 bags. So with economic demand remaining the same, the supply what call having got down. So naturally prices have started rising. And as we all know, the main source of income for Sri Lankan is its what called tourism and the tea and what called tea exports. And most of the essential items like sugars, medicine, etc., Sri Lanka imports from other countries. As such, the country is badly in need of the foreign exchange reserves which it gets by way of tourism and exporting tea and all that. But look at the what called the tourism seen because of the COVID. There is a fall in what call tourism revenue, which was almost 10% of GDP. In 2019, the Sri Lankan government got a revenue of 450 million, which fell down to 3 million by 2021. Now, as a result, the foreign exchange reserves, which was 7.8 billion in 2019, fell to what called 2.5 billion by 2021. Since the country imports most of the essential items, they were having what I call crisis. Now look at the what I call in the picture, the long queue as such. Government had to impose what I call economic emergency and ration the supply of what I call essential items. So in other words, Sri Lankan today is staring at increasing prices and high external debt. In fact, the debt is so high that for instance, you look at what I call the loans raised from China. Since the country was not in a position to want to repay them, they had to lease a port. And as far as increasing prices, during the last 3-4 days, what we have read in the what call newspapers or seen on the TV channels is that the price of what call a liter petrol was costing about what call 219 rupees, a single egg about 35 rupees, a milk powder was costing about 1900. That means an average what call Sri Lankan had to spend 1 month's salary for what called 2 weeks what called requirements as such. So what are the challenges before the Sri Lankan government right now, having got stuck in a deep economic crisis unseen during the last 73 years? Number one, unsustainable public debt. They have issued what called bonds in the market. They have printed more and more currency. They borrowed what called loans. But the intriguing part is that most of the loans raised from the foreign countries were used for what were repaying the debt also. So as such, the foreign exchange reserves what did not increase as such. So low foreign exchange reserves and increasing financial needs in the times to come. Another factor which government has failed to monitor or failed to work on is that it's huge number of public sector enterprises. Sri Lanka has about 527 and most of them are what are called loss making units, not being accountable because since the agents of the state. Now, when we look at the factors that led to the current economic crisis, we find number one, improper financial planning. Nothing wrong in what we call raising loans, as long as the loans are diverted into productive channels, whereby you get some benefits using which you can repay the loans as such. Second, not acting with the foresight. For example, you look at organic farming. Organic farming as a concept was good, but have you prepared the people mentally? Have you looked at what are called pros and cons of it? What about what a consequent impact on fall in the productive pay as such, thereby resulting in price of essential commodities. Another factor which contributed a lot to the current economic crisis, the burden of infrastructure projects. These infrastructure projects, as we all know, they are long yielding. They will not give the benefits as such. So when they have conceptualized about these infrastructure projects, which are very huge, probably they have not taken into account the repayment part as such. Then you have corruption, the hasty decisions of the government, like what I call reducing the taxes. No doubt, nothing wrong in what I call a government working for what I call people's welfare as such. But a mute question arises as to at what cost? Are you compromising the future growth of the country and the future welfare of the people at the cost of what I call welfare? Or are you planning to what I call balance people's welfare with that of what I call country's growth? A country which fails to what I call focus on growth and goes on what I call spending left and right what I call people's welfare is bound to suffer in the long run. So you need to what I call balance the short-term benefit of winning people's trust by public expenditure, and another one is what I call implementing projects for the overall economic development of the country. That's fine. Now what is that the country needs to do? First and foremost is that the government has what I call sit tight and review its economic policies, like printing more and more what I call currency, or reducing what I call taxes with a view to improve people's welfare as such. Let it be what I call realistic, what it can do, what it cannot do. Of course, some tough decisions have to be taken. No pain, no gain. Second one is the government has to prune its government expenditure and look at relook at the populist government schemes and all that. And these PSUs, most of them are what I call loss making. It's high time we need to what I call fine tune and what I call try to improve the performance so that they start generating funds for financing the economic development of the country. Next, it's high time the government renegotiates with the concerned countries like China regarding the what I call huge infrastructure projects, which have long yielding nature as such. And the next and the most important is it's time the Sri Lankan government takes a tough decision as to welfare versus growth. If it wishes to earn the trust of the people simply by focusing on what I call welfare, then definitely it is compromising on its country's growth. Now the current situation, the seriousness of the situation could be gauged from the fact that the government had to deploy the army for distributing what I call diesel, petrol and kerosene as such. Because there is a huge rush for getting them as such. When I say this, I am not trying to say that the government should what I call forget about people's welfare. But what the government needs to do is balance people's welfare with that of the long-term country's growth. When we are talking about long-term country's growth, we are talking about future generations' what I call welfare also. Next is, as we all know, tourism is one of the what I call major areas what I call earning foreign exchange for Sri Lanka. So now that the COVID has almost receded, it's time government what I call tries to do something to what I call prop up tourism by announcing some incentives, subsidies, etc., etc., etc. So in conclusion, I can say that free midday meal scheme is over. It's time to what I call reflect, renegotiate, and what I call redefine your priorities so that the country could come out of its worst economic crisis what I call glaring at what I call Sri Lanka, so that people are not subjected to what I call undue suffering as such. Thank you.